In the year 1756, neighbors of a property in Moscow heard the rumble of a carriage departing at dawn. When they investigated, they discovered the body of a young servant girl with her skin flayed and hair torn out. They didn't yet know they were witnessing the first victim of one of the most brutal serial killers in Russian history. Daria Salikova was no ordinary murderer. She was a widowed countess, owner of an immense fortune and 600 serfs, who became her personal victims in a reign of terror that would last for years. Officially, she was convicted of killing 38 people, but investigators believe the real number may have reached 138 victims. This is the story of how a devout noblewoman transformed into the demon of Moscow, using her absolute power over serfs to satisfy a bloodlust that shocked even Empress Catherine. Prepare to meet the woman who turned torture into personal entertainment and who paid the ultimate price in a windowless dungeon. To understand how Daria became a monster, we must first explore the privileged world into which she was born. On the 20th of March in the year 1730, Daria Nikolaeva Ivanova was born in Moscow, daughter of one of the wealthiest and most influential families of the Russian aristocracy. Daria grew up in a world where serfs were treated literally as property. In 18th century Russia, nobles held the power of life and death over their serfs, who were called souls and could be sold like cattle. This system of serfdom created perfect conditions for extreme abuse, especially when combined with sadistic personalities. During her youth, Daria was seen as a devout and respectable young woman. She attended church regularly, made generous donations to monasteries, and displayed all the characteristics expected of a religious aristocrat. No one suspected the darkness that lurked behind her pious facade. In the year 1750, at the age of 20, Daria married Gleb Alexeyevich Saltykov, a captain of the Imperial Guard and member of one of Russia's most powerful families. The marriage brought her not only greater social status, but also direct connections to the imperial court and political protection that would prove crucial later. The couple had 2 children, Theodore in the year 1750 and Nicholas the following year. For several years, Daria led the apparently normal life of an aristocratic wife, overseeing properties and raising her children, but all of this would change drastically when fate gave her absolute power. In the year 1755, Gleb died suddenly, leaving Daria widowed at 25 years of age. His death completely transformed Daria's situation. As a widow with no other relatives of her husband claiming inheritance, she became the absolute owner of 2 enormous properties and 600 serfs. Absolute power revealed the true nature of Daria Saltykova. Free from any male supervision, and with complete control over hundreds of human lives, she began to demonstrate a cruelty that would grow progressively over the following years. Her first confirmed victim was a servant who committed some minor error in household work. Daria beat her with such violence that the young woman died from internal injuries. But instead of feeling remorse, Daria experienced a disturbing satisfaction with the act of causing suffering and death. The murders became more frequent and more elaborate. Daria developed specific methods of torture that she applied depending on her mood. Some victims were beaten to death with wooden rollers or hot irons. Others were forced to stand barefoot in snow for hours until they died of hypothermia. One of her preferred methods was pouring boiling water over victims before beating them to death. In one documented occasion, she pushed an 11-year-old child down a stone staircase, causing fatal injuries. In another, she set fire to a young woman's hair. Daria also forced serfs to torture each other for her entertainment. Husbands were forced to beat their wives in the countess's presence, who watched the spectacles as if they were theatrical performances. Those who refused to participate faced even worse tortures. The most shocking documented case involved a pregnant servant named Anisha Grigorova. Daria beat the woman so brutally that she died, along with the baby she was carrying. A priest was called to bury the body, but was so horrified by the injuries that he refused to proceed until a police investigation was conducted. For years, Daria managed to avoid consequences through bribery and intimidation. She bought off police officers with money, food, and even gave some of her serfs to local authorities. One officer became so close that he gave advice on how to handle complaints. When families of victims tried to file complaints, Daria used her connections to make the accusations disappear. Accusers were frequently arrested or exiled, while she remained free to continue her crimes. Her social status made her virtually untouchable. But in the year 1762, Daria's luck finally changed. Families of victims managed to bring their accusations directly to Empress Catherine II, bypassing corrupt local authorities. Catherine, newly arrived to power and interested in demonstrating justice, decided to personally investigate the case. The investigation ordered by Catherine II was meticulous and comprehensive. During 6 years from 1762 to 1768, imperial authorities interviewed hundreds of witnesses, examined property records, and collected evidence of crimes that shocked even experienced investigators. 300 people testified against Daria during the investigation. Surviving serfs reported unimaginable tortures, while neighbors confirmed sightings of mutilated bodies being removed from the property. The evidence was so abundant that it became impossible to ignore or suppress. The official number of deaths attributed to Daria was 138, but she was formally convicted of 38 murders that could be proven beyond any doubt. Throughout the entire trial, she maintained a simple but desperate defense. "I know nothing. I did nothing." Catherine II faced a dilemma in deciding Daria's punishment. The death penalty had been abolished in Russia in the year 1754, and the empress needed the support of the nobility. Executing a countess could create a dangerous precedent that would threaten other aristocrats. The solution was a punishment that would be simultaneously humiliating and permanent. In the year 1768, Daria was chained to a public platform in Moscow's Red Square for 1 hour with a sign around her neck declaring, "This woman tortured and murdered." Crowds came to see her being publicly ridiculed. After the public humiliation, Daria was sentenced to life imprisonment. In the basement of the Ivanovsky convent in Moscow, her cell was built specifically for her, a room without windows where she lived in total darkness, chained and under constant surveillance by a nun responsible for her feeding. For 11 years, from 1768 to 1779, Daria lived in absolute isolation. Her only escape from the cell was to participate in weekly religious services, but even then she didn't enter the church, remaining outside under guard. In the year 1779, her conditions were slightly relaxed. She was transferred to another building in the monastery, where she received a cell with a small barred window. Although still a prisoner, she could at least see natural light for the first time in more than a decade. Daria Saltykova remained imprisoned for the rest of her life, dying on the 9th of December in the year 181, at 71 years of age. She spent the last 33 years of her life paying for crimes that shocked a nation accustomed to violence against serfs. Her story became legend in Russia, serving as an extreme example of the dangers of absolute power without accountability. Even in a society where abuse against serfs was common, Daria's crimes were considered monstrous and unacceptable. The case of Daria Saltykova also marked a turning point in Russian attitudes toward serfdom. Although the system persisted for another century, her story contributed to debates about the limits of aristocratic power and treatment of serfs. Modern analyses suggest that Daria suffered from psychological disorders that today would be classified as sadistic psychopathy. Her combination of superficial charm, lack of empathy, and pleasure in causing suffering are classic characteristics of psychopathic serial killers. But psychological explanations don't diminish her responsibility for the crimes or the suffering of her victims. Daria deliberately chose to use her power to satisfy sadistic impulses, transforming vulnerable human beings into objects of her cruel entertainment. The story of Daria Saltykova remains as a dark reminder of how unjust social structures can allow human monsters to operate freely. When some people have absolute power over others, there is always a risk that this power will be used to satisfy the darkest impulses of human nature. Her imprisonment in the basement of a convent was more than punishment. It was a symbol that not even the highest aristocratic status could protect someone from the consequences of sufficiently horrific crimes. Catherine II sent a clear message that there were limits to what even the nobility could do with impunity. Today, more than 200 years after her death, Daria Saltykova remains as one of the most hated figures in Russian history. Her name has become synonymous with aristocratic cruelty and abuse of power. She proves that the worst monsters don't always come from the lower classes. Sometimes they wear crowns and live in palaces. The countess who murdered her servants was not just an isolated criminal. She was the product of a social system that dehumanized serfs and gave absolute power to aristocrats. Her story serves as an eternal warning about the dangers of social structures that allow some humans to treat others as disposable property. Daria Saltykova transformed her property into a personal extermination camp where hundreds of innocent people were tortured and killed to satisfy her bloodlust. She paid the ultimate price for her crimes. But her victims never recovered the lives that were stolen from them by a woman who should have been their protector, not their murderer.